She was the face everyone recognized, the name on every magazine cover, the dream girl of an entire generation. But what if the same world that once adored her suddenly went silent? What if the brightest star in Hollywood's sky vanished without a trace? How does someone go from being everywhere to nowhere overnight? And why did one of the most daring, talented, and beloved actresses of her time disappear just when she had it all? This isn't just a story of fame, it's a story of what fame hides behind the spotlight. So where did Winona Ryder go? And what really happened when the world stopped watching? In the twilight of the 1980s and the golden dawn of the 1990s, one name stood out like a beacon across the world of film and fame: Winona Ryder. Not just an actress, but a phenomenon, Hollywood's crowned queen and the embodiment of every dreamer's fantasy. With each role she took, Winona didn't just act, she transformed. Whether in beloved classics or deeply layered dramas, her presence was magnetic. Off-screen, she was just as captivating. Her romance with the era's heartthrob, Johnny Depp, became the love story of a generation, printed in bold letters across tabloids and whispered about like a legend. But what truly set Winona apart wasn't just her beauty or her fame. It was her unapologetic boldness. At a time when conformity ruled, she chose to walk a different path. She embraced characters that others feared, delved into roles that defied Hollywood norms, and presented herself exactly as she was: fearlessly unique and refreshingly unpredictable. In a matter of a few short years, she achieved what many spend a lifetime chasing: fame, respect, admiration. Not as a rising star, but as someone who had already conquered the heights. Then, just as quickly as she had soared, everything stopped. The lights dimmed, the headlines faded, the cameras turned away. Winona Ryder, once the pulse of Hollywood, stepped away from the world that had adored her. For years there was silence. No interviews, no films, no appearances. The girl who had been everywhere was suddenly nowhere. But what caused this sudden disappearance? What personal storm had she faced behind the curtain of fame? And how did the shadows of depression play a role in rewriting the course of her story? To understand her fall, we have to look closer, not just at what happened in public, but at what was unraveling in private. Because Winona's absence wasn't just a retreat from Hollywood, it was a journey through a darker place. And that's where her story truly begins. But to understand how everything changed, we have to go back to the very beginning, to a time when a quiet teenager with expressive eyes took her first steps into the magical world of cinema, unaware that she was about to become the voice of an entire generation. Let's go back to 1986. A 14-year-old girl stepped onto a movie set for the first time. The film was Lucas, and her role was small, almost easy to miss. But that brief appearance was the quiet spark of something bigger. She wasn't just another hopeful newcomer chasing fame. There was something different in her eyes. A depth, a quiet storm. For the next 2 years, she took similar roles. Humble beginnings, scenes that flickered in and out, but she was learning, watching, absorbing. And then, in 1988, everything changed. That's when she crossed paths with the visionary director Tim Burton and landed the role that would mark the true beginning of her rise, Beetlejuice. Though the film was a comedy, Winona Ryder didn't just act in it, she transformed. At just 17 years old, she played a character far older in emotion and complexity. Somehow, she captured feelings most adults struggled to express: loneliness, alienation, the quiet ache of not fitting in. Her performance didn't feel like acting, it felt like truth. That truth resonated. Teenagers everywhere saw themselves in her, not just in the movie theaters, but in their bedrooms, in their schools, in their silence. She became their mirror. And as her character stood up against the forces trying to smother her spirit, she gave them something they hadn't felt in a long time. Oh, but her impact didn't stay on the screen. It spilled into the streets, into culture, into the way young people dressed, spoke, and saw themselves. Winona Ryder wasn't just acting, she was becoming a symbol. But just when Hollywood started labeling her as a quiet, deep soul, the girl next door with a dark twist, Nona took a sharp left turn. A decision that would shock her team, confuse the public, and redefine her image forever. What happens when a young actress decides not to follow the rules, but to rewrite them? When everyone around her warns her not to touch a role, but she says yes anyway, because she feels it? What if that role is dangerous, misunderstood, and unlike anything any teenage star had dared to play before? Winona Ryder didn't just accept the challenge. She became the challenge. Before Heathers, Winona Ryder was still forming in the eyes of the public. A girl with a unique aura, a quiet kind of confidence, and a fashion sense that flirted with the edge of mainstream America. Her mismatched clothes, the pale skin, the dark eyes, all of it made her feel like someone pulled from the pages of a secret diary written by teens who didn't quite fit in, and they saw her, really saw her. She wasn't just acting in movies, she was becoming a symbol, a face for all the misfits, rebels, and quiet souls who had something to say but didn't know how to say it. Through her, they found a voice. And she leaned into that role, not by playing it safe, but by pushing the boundaries even further. That's exactly what she did the following year, in 1989, when Heathers came along. Her agent tried everything to stop her from taking the role. He thought it was career suicide. He believed that playing a rebellious high school girl involved in a dark plot would ruin her carefully built image, that it was too strange, too risky, too much. But for Nona, it was just right. She read the script, and something clicked. It was bold, biting, and raw. It wasn't just another teenage love story with locker room crushes and prom queens. No, it was a satire, a rebellion, a mirror held up to everything fake and polished about high school movies at the time. Her character, strong-willed, misunderstood, and caught in a twisted plan to make popular students' deaths look like suicides, was the complete opposite of the cliches Hollywood kept feeding its young audience. And that's exactly why she took it. Because Winona Ryder never wanted to be what they expected. She wanted to be real. Heathers might not have exploded at the box office, but it exploded in the hearts of those who felt unseen. And while the critics weren't ready for its bold message, Nona had already carved a new lane when she wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. But just as her career was breaking every mold, something else happened. Off-screen, unexpected, and unforgettable. What if the kind of love you see only in the movies actually found you? What if it started with a single look across a cinema aisle and turned into one of the most talked about romances of the decade? When two of Hollywood's most iconic rebels crossed paths, it wasn't just attraction, it was magnetic. But behind the cameras, behind the headlines, behind the tattoos, was a story that would one day crack under the weight of fame, pressure, and heartbreak. At the time of its release, Heathers was a risky film with a message too bold for many studios to back confidently. It struggled in the box office, not because of the acting or the story, but because the producers couldn't find the right way to sell it to the public. The marketing was limited, the controversy was overwhelming, and yet, some stories just need time. Over the years, the movie began to take on a life of its own. Quietly, slowly, people started discovering it on VHS, on late-night television, in word-of-mouth conversations between teens who felt like outsiders. And the movie grew. It became a cult classic. One of those rare gems that are bigger than their budget, louder than their critics, and eternal in the eyes of their fans. And at the center of it all was Winona Ryder, rising, glowing, and carrying the film's legacy on her shoulders. But just as her career was soaring, fate had something else in store for her. In 1989, during a casual film screening in a dimly lit cinema, Nona's path crossed with that of another rising star, Johnny Depp. It wasn't planned. It wasn't expected. But it was instant. The story could have come straight out of a screenplay, a shared glance, a quiet recognition, that magnetic pull that words can't explain. They were two souls living outside the lines of Hollywood's expectations, and suddenly, they collided. Their mutual friends saw it too, and arranged a meeting. And from the moment they sat down together, the hours slipped away unnoticed. One day turned into many. Conversations turned into connection. And just like that, the two became inseparable. They weren't just actors in love, they were symbols of a generation. Wild, untamed, and deeply human. Just when it seemed like Winona Ryder had reached the peak of her career, her life would take an unexpected turn. Fame, success, and love couldn't protect her from the struggles that lay ahead. What caused her sudden disappearance from the public? How did she cope with the challenges that followed? And most importantly, what brought her back into the spotlight stronger than ever? But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, something unexpected happened. What could derail the career of one of Hollywood's most promising stars? And how did she manage to return from the brink of being forgotten? In the early 2000s, just when Winona Ryder's star was at its brightest, she found herself at the center of a scandal that would threaten everything she had worked so hard for. It all started in 2001, when she was arrested for shoplifting from a high-end department store in Beverly Hills. The story broke like wildfire, and the media, always hungry for drama, devoured it. For many, this was the turning point in Winona's career. The once perfect image of the Hollywood darling crumbled before the public's eyes. The press couldn't get enough of the details, the trial, the courtroom drama, the scrutiny of her every move. To many, it seemed like a tragic fall from grace for someone who once seemed untouchable. Her career, once filled with promising projects, came to a screeching halt. Offers dried up, and the world seemed to forget the talented actress who had once captivated millions. She withdrew from the public eye, retreating into a much-needed period of self-reflection. But in that silence, something remarkable happened. Instead of fading into obscurity, Winona Ryder began to rebuild herself, both personally and professionally. After years of keeping a low profile, she slowly returned to the screen, taking on more mature and complex roles. Her comeback wasn't instant, but it was steady. With each project, she proved that the public had underestimated her resilience. So, what led to her resurgence in Hollywood? How did Winona Ryder rise from the ashes and reclaim her place as one of the most beloved actresses of her generation? Let's dive into the details of her incredible return. Her love story with Johnny Depp had captured the hearts of millions, and their breakup was as unexpected as it was heartbreaking. But what happened after this split? Could Winona Ryder continue her meteoric rise in Hollywood? Or would this personal tragedy have a lasting effect on her career? What happens when the fairy tale romance fades away? Can someone so young and successful recover from a heartbreak that shook the world? How did this split mark a turning point in her life and career? To the early 90s, Winona Ryder was living a life that many would envy. She was at the top of Hollywood, landing multiple roles each year and becoming one of the most sought-after actresses of her generation. The diversity in her film choices showed just how versatile she was, playing everything from quirky, rebellious teenagers to dramatic, deeply emotional characters. She was not just a rising star, she was a shining beacon in Hollywood, a name on everyone's lips. But amid the whirlwind of success, one of the most talked about relationships in Hollywood began to unravel. In 1993, Winona and Johnny Depp, who had been together for several years, suddenly called it quits. There was no public warning, no foretelling of what was to come. Their breakup shocked the world, leaving fans and the media in disbelief. Years later, Johnny Depp would reveal that the breakup stemmed from several factors. The age difference between them, though not insurmountable, created a divide in their relationship. The constant pressure of being in the public eye, coupled with the media's relentless intrusion into their lives, made it hard for the young couple to maintain a healthy relationship. Additionally, the demands of their careers kept them apart for long periods, preventing them from truly spending time together in the same place. For Winona, the breakup was a devastating blow. Not only was she dealing with the emotional toll of the split, but the media also painted their breakup in a way that made her seem vulnerable and fragile. But Winona, ever the fighter, refused to let this setback define her. She had already proven herself as one of the brightest stars in Hollywood, and despite the challenges, she would continue to forge ahead, proving once again that she was more than capable of handling whatever life threw her way. So, what came next for Winona? Could she rise above the heartache and continue her career with the same fervor? The answers lie in the next chapter of her journey. What happens when fame and love collide in a way that leaves both individuals broken? With the end of her relationship with Johnny Depp, Winona Ryder found herself facing more than just a career setback. She was plunged into the depths of despair. But what would be the breaking point for her? Could she find a way back from the edge of destruction? What does it take to break a person so completely that they lose everything? Is it possible to recover from a love so intense that it consumes you? And what happens when you're on the brink of losing it all? You find a way back from the darkness? The aftermath of Winona Ryder and Johnny Depp's breakup left both of them in pieces. Depp, known for his calm and cool demeanor, was unable to cope with the intense pressures of fame that came with being one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. As a result, he spiraled into a destructive path, turning to drugs in an attempt to numb the pain. His personal struggles, compounded by the media's constant scrutiny, only worsened the situation. Tim Burton, the director who had worked closely with both actors, observed Depp's descent into this emotional chaos. Burton would later recall that Depp cried every day during the filming of Edward Scissorhands, blaming himself for the heartbreak that had shaken Winona's world. He was convinced that his actions had ruined their relationship, and the guilt of it consumed him. For Winona, the pain of the breakup was overwhelming. The emotional weight of losing someone she had once believed would be her forever love sent her spiraling into a dark place. The pressures of her public life, coupled with her personal pain, led her to a point where she felt as if she could not go on. In the midst of her despair, one of the darkest moments of her life occurred. One night, after a particularly hard day, she fell asleep with a lit cigarette in her hand, unaware of the consequences of her actions. Suddenly, she woke to find her house engulfed in flames. The entire room was burning, and she had narrowly escaped what could have been a tragic end. It was a wake-up call, one that forced her to confront the fragility of life and how close she had come to losing everything. But instead of succumbing to the darkness, Winona began to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. However, recovery wasn't immediate. The scars of her emotional pain and the turmoil she had experienced in the wake of her breakup with Depp would stay with her for a long time. But this event marked a turning point, a moment where she could no longer afford to dwell in her despair. She had to find a way to rise above the wreckage and begin anew. The pressures of fame, combined with a turbulent personal life, slowly took their toll on Winona Ryder. But her struggles didn't start with her Hollywood career. They were deep-rooted in her past, from childhood fears to bullying. What if the real battle she was fighting all along was one that no one saw? How did her early life shape the woman she became? And how did it all culminate in her breaking point? What if the roots of Winona Ryder's struggles weren't born? From Hollywood, but from her childhood? Could the pressures of fame have been the tipping point? Or was there a much deeper battle that had been brewing for years? What happens when the weight of your past and present becomes too much to bear? Winona's psychological struggles, as intense as they were not a product of her sudden rise to fame in Hollywood. In fact, the roots of her troubles stretch back to her childhood. Growing up, she was deeply affected by her family's history, particularly the trauma of the Holocaust that haunted her grandparents. The fear of losing her own parents haunted her every day, to the point where she would sleep outside their room at night, convinced that the horrors of the past would repeat themselves. This constant anxiety was compounded by a painful experience in school, where Winona became the target of relentless bullying. Her unique appearance, her androgynous style, and the way she carried herself led some of her peers to label her in cruel and unfair ways. Some even went so far as to accuse her of being a boy or label her as gay, causing her immense emotional distress. The bullying was so severe that the school intervened, removing her to protect her from the torment that seemed to follow her every step. Despite her family's best efforts, Winona couldn't escape the psychological effects of these formative years. The emotional strain from her past, combined with the pressures of fame, led to significant mental health struggles. By the time she was 19, these issues reached a breaking point. Her body and mind could no longer handle the weight, and she found herself facing something she had never prepared for: insomnia so severe that she went without sleep for 4 consecutive days. Unable to cope with the overwhelming exhaustion, she was admitted to a mental health facility for treatment, marking a stark turning point in her life. The strain on Winona's mental health, particularly during her early years in Hollywood, was more than just a product of her fame. It was a culmination of years of fear, anxiety, and rejection. As she grappled with these internal demons, the bright lights of Hollywood seemed more like a spotlight on her vulnerabilities, rather than a stage for her success. But this was just the beginning of a long and tumultuous journey. Would she be able to find a way to heal from the deep wounds of her past? How would she navigate the unforgiving world of fame, knowing how fragile her mental health truly was? From the highs of stardom to a sudden and tragic fall, Winona Ryder's career seemed to unravel in the blink of an eye. But was it just a string of bad luck, or was something deeper at play, pushing her toward an irreversible path? As her personal struggles intensified, her professional life also began to spiral downward. What happens when the weight of fame, failure, and personal demons becomes too much to bear? Could one moment define an entire career? How did a series of unfortunate events lead Winona Ryder to one of the most infamous moments in Hollywood history, forever changing the course of her life? As her personal demons continued to take their toll, Winona's career came to a sudden halt. Starting in 1995, the once flourishing star saw a string of films fail, for reasons that no one could explain. Despite her undeniable talent, the success that once seemed assured began to elude her, leaving her grappling with a sense of irrelevance in an industry that demands constant reinvention. Her performance in Girl, Interrupted in 1999 was a rare exception. She played a role that suited her perfectly, and though it earned her praise, the spotlight soon shifted away from her, favoring a new rising star, Angelina Jolie. Jolie not only took the fame that Winona had once been accustomed to, but she also won an Oscar for the very role that had been Winona's chance at redemption. It was as if, despite Winona's best efforts, the world had moved on. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how many quality films she made, they all seemed to fail, one after the other. Hollywood lost interest, and Winona became a mere shadow of her former self. As her career faltered, her choices in films began to reflect the desperation of someone who had lost their footing, someone willing to take risks in order to regain their place in the industry. This sense of desperation fueled her growing mental health struggles. Each failure stung more deeply than the last, sending Winona into the depths of depression. She was no longer the carefree starlet that had once dazzled on screen. She became a target, both of her own doubts and the judgment of an unforgiving public. Then came the scandal that would define her career's downfall. In 2001, Winona was caught shoplifting from a high-end department store in Beverly Hills. What had once been an unthinkable act for the star, who seemed to have everything, now became the one thing that would define her. The public reaction was swift and merciless. She was dragged through the media, her every move scrutinized, her once stellar reputation shattered. The world watched as her personal troubles collided with the public's insatiable thirst for scandal. The case went to trial, and things only got worse from there. The public prosecutor, seeing the media circus surrounding Winona's arrest, decided to make an example of her. He believed that, as a famous Hollywood star, she had come to think of herself as being above the law. The trial was broadcast live on television, and the pressure on Winona was immense. Her reputation, which had already been tarnished, was now in tatters. Hollywood had distanced itself from her, and her career, once filled with promise and potential, had come crashing down. The question remained, how had this all happened to someone who had once been at the top of her game? Was it simply bad decisions, or had the weight of her inner struggles, compounded by the pressures of fame, led her to this destructive moment? The golden age of youth in Hollywood is a fleeting moment. As time passes, many stars find themselves struggling to maintain their relevance in an industry that values youth and novelty. But what happens when the same industry that once celebrated you begins to forget you? What if your age becomes a barrier to your success, no matter how much you've achieved? What happens to stars who were once at the peak of Hollywood fame when they outgrow the industry's ideal image? Can they redefine themselves, or are they destined to fade into obscurity? Is the pressure of staying young the ultimate challenge? For actresses, and does age truly determine their worth in Hollywood? For Winona Ryder, much of her early stardom and success came when she was young, in her teens and early 20s. But as she passed the age of 18, the very same Hollywood that had once celebrated her began to look past her, as it often does with actresses who have reached the threshold of youth. In a world where age is both a blessing and a curse, young actresses quickly fade from the spotlight as they move into their 30s, making way for younger, newer faces. At that time, Hollywood was especially unforgiving to actresses who no longer embodied the image of youth. As the years passed, they were often forgotten in favor of new talent. Just think of actresses like Amy Adams, Jennifer Connelly, or even Scarlett Johansson, talented women who found themselves shifting to smaller roles as time went on. Even though they had more to offer, Hollywood was quick to replace them as age began to show. These actresses, no matter how successful they were, became less of a priority for directors and producers as they sought out fresh faces. For many, the reality is stark. As age shows, the opportunities that once flowed freely dry up. Some actresses adapt to this new phase by taking on different roles, ones that are often much more mature than the roles they first became famous for. Icons like Emma Thompson and Jamie Lee Curtis were able to transform themselves, playing characters that reflected their age and experience, carving out new niches for themselves in a changing landscape. However, for others, the result is far less glamorous. They fade into smaller, less significant roles, often relegated to TV series or independent films, where they are no longer in the limelight. The star-studded careers they once had are replaced with an existence on the fringes of the industry, a far cry from their heyday. And so, for many actresses, their careers are not measured by their talent or legacy, but by their ability to stay young in an industry that values only youth and beauty. As the industry continued to evolve, Winona found herself trapped in a strange and unfair limbo. Not young enough to land the same roles she once ruled, and not quite old enough to transition into mature character parts. Hollywood, with its rigid standards of beauty and age, offered her little room to breathe. But Winona wasn't willing to reshape herself just to fit back in. What if you were told that a little surgery could bring your fame back? Would you change your face to revive your career? Or would you stand by your values and embrace time, even if it meant losing everything? Winona Ryder was no stranger to these pressures. At a time when many actresses were resorting to plastic surgery to maintain their image and hold on to their careers, Winona was advised by many in the industry to do the same. They told her that getting a few procedures done, tightening here, smoothing there, would put her back on the map. That it would help her keep up with the new faces dominating the screens. But Winona refused. She didn't want to be someone else. She loved her face the way it was. Its lines, its natural aging. She believed in growing older gracefully and chose to embrace the passing of time rather than fight it. To her, every wrinkle had meaning. Every subtle change in her features was a reminder of her journey. However, this decision placed her in a complicated gray zone. Hollywood didn't know where to place her anymore. She was no longer the youthful icon of the 90s that audiences fell in love with. But at the same time, her youthful features didn't allow her to convincingly play mature roles either. Her baby face betrayed her age, and the industry struggled to cast her in roles that made sense. Neither the ingenue nor the seasoned mother. She tried to reignite her career in 2006 with the film A Scanner darkly alongside her Spanish friend, but it went largely unnoticed. Then came a glimmer of hope in 2010. Director Darren Aronofsky gave her a chance in Black Swan. It was a small role, yes, but a powerful one. Winona poured her soul into it, portraying the aging ballerina cast aside for a younger star. A reflection, perhaps, of her own life. Her performance was haunting, raw, and real. People noticed. Critics praised her, audiences remembered her, but Hollywood still didn't come knocking. The role wasn't enough to shift the course of her career. Her comeback, though emotionally resonant, wasn't the triumphant return many had hoped for. She was still floating in that uncertain space, waiting for the industry to finally see her for who she had become, an actress with depth experience, and an untold story waiting to be told. For years, Winona wandered in the shadows of an industry that once adored her, working quietly on indie films and leaning on old friendships just to stay afloat. Hollywood had moved on, but fate hadn't forgotten her, and when it finally came, back knocking, it wasn't through the silver screen, but through something entirely new. What happens when a forgotten star is offered a role no one thought she'd accept? What if that role wasn't glamorous, wasn't loud, but turned out to be the very thing that would make her unforgettable again? At the age of 44, in a moment no one saw coming, Winona Ryder made a bold move that changed everything. She said yes to television. For the first time in her career, she accepted a leading role in a TV series. That series was Stranger Things. The creators of the show, the Duffer Brothers, never imagined she'd actually agree. To them, Winona was a legend, a face from the VHS tapes of their childhood. They admired her, idolized her, and had built the character of Joyce Byers with her in mind. Still, they were prepared for rejection. Why would a former A-list movie star who once ruled the screens of the 90s step into the unpredictable world of streaming television? But Winona surprised them. She saw something in the script, maybe a reflection of her own story. The role of Joyce wasn't just another part. It was raw, desperate, deeply human. It was a mother fighting to find her missing son against impossible odds. And maybe that's what Winona connected to, because for years, she had also been fighting. Not against monsters in another dimension, but against time, doubt, and a world that had almost erased her. She threw herself into the role. She didn't just play Joyce, she became her. Her performance was powerful, trembling, authentic. And suddenly, Stranger Things wasn't just a new sci-fi show on Netflix. It was the show everyone was talking about. And at the heart of it was Winona Ryder, front and center once again. Without her, the series would have been a different story. The vulnerability she brought, the intensity in her eyes, the way she broke down on screen, it was magnetic. Viewers felt it. Critics praised it. Hollywood took notice. And in that moment, Winona wasn't just back. She was reborn. If Winona Ryder's story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Her journey is proof that no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back up. From stardom to scandal and back to the screen, she showed us that resilience, honesty, and staying true to yourself can rewrite any narrative. Drop a comment with what inspired you the most, follow for more powerful stories, and let's remind the world that everyone deserves a second chance, even you.